so much for being with us. I'm really excited to talk with you and get some good nuggets around letters and connection.
I'm thrilled to be here, and I get to talk about what I'm passionate about. How fun.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad. So my first question for you is around letter writing, handwritten cards, and snail mail. It is super important to me. I send a lot of handwritten cards on a weekly basis, but sometimes it's hard to know what to talk about or what to say. What tips and suggestions do you have for those that are watching to get us started on the path of regular and habitual snail mail communication?
Well, the first thing is to write one and then see how you feel. So I always say that the most important thing you do when you're writing one of those letters is to think, how do I want the reader to feel? And how do I want to feel when I've written it? And so most of the time when I'm writing it by hand, it's for gratitude or for thanks. Oftentimes I'm big into writing thank you notes by hand.
Yeah.
And there's something special about holding the piece of paper that the other person has touched. There's like that physical connection.
Yeah.
And then there's the connection of your words. And so when my kids were little and I wanted them to write thank you notes to their grandparents, I came up with a little acronym, a silly little 5-step thing, and I called it SMILE. And so I offer that to people as a way of getting into the practice and making it easy for themselves. So the first part is to really think about how you want the person to feel. So start with the feelings, that's the S. And then you don't say thank you in the first sentence. You really want to focus in on how did they make you feel? And then you can mention what it is that they did for you or they gave you or how they made you feel and thank them. And then I come to my favorite thing, storytelling. Include a little story about what they did. Stories, we as humans connect through story. We always have. And when you tell someone a story about what they did for you or how you used their gift, it really deepens that connection. And the L is lavish them with more details and then end with gratitude. So that's my little simple trick for getting into the habit of writing, because it is hard to know, what should I say? Where do I start? So I can just say, thanks for the present. And then what do you do?
Right.
So this little way of using some storytelling and focusing on the feelings helps me write to people.
I even think that might be helpful for those really difficult cards that are hard to send when someone's experiencing a loss of any kind, whether it's a divorce or the loss through death. But to use that same storytelling route, if you're just telling a story of a memory, that would be probably very meaningful to the recipient.
In fact, actually, you're absolutely right. Sadly, I had to write a condolence note this morning. And so I wanted to tell the woman stories about her husband that mattered to me.
Yeah.
I wanted her to feel that I admired him. So I just held that feeling in my heart while I was writing. And then, and I have to admit, I write on the computer first. First of all, I'm a terrible speller, and spell check helps me. But I write on the computer first because then I don't fear making a mistake. So then I might write it, and if it's a really important letter, like a condolence letter, I might let it sit for a day.
Yeah.
And then I might come back to it and say, did I get it right? And we're not talking hours here. It's probably 5 or 10 minutes the first time. Go back and double check for a couple minutes, then find the right piece of stationery, 5 minutes of writing, find a stamp. That's usually the hard part. But it really isn't a time intensive.
Yeah.
And the more you do this, the faster you are at it. But it does help for me. In fact, I write all of my stories and legacy letters and thank you notes on the computer first, because then I know I can edit.
That's such a smart idea. I love that. And it kind of almost gives a little bit more weight to the intention behind what you're saying, to let it sit and come back to it. I really like that.
Yeah. And the other nice part about it is I have a file in my computer that I save the letters I write. And then if somebody says, oh, I love that letter, but I can't find it, I have it. And I can read it and I can remember the things that I've told people before. So it's fun.
That is so okay. So this may be just something weird and it may be silly to admit, but a lot of times someone will say to me, "Oh, thank you so much for the card. It meant a lot and I really appreciate what you said." And I'm thinking, I don't know. I don't know what I said. So I'm
Yeah.
actually going to use that tip. That's so fantastic. And I also am a pen pal with somebody, and often his responses to what I've said, I can't remember, I can't remember the storyline of our conversation. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
idea. Fabulous.
And yeah, and the act of writing itself, yes, you're making somebody else feel great with what you're writing, but you know this because you write so much. The act of writing the card yourself makes you feel grateful, makes you happy, makes you find meaning in your life. And so rereading what you've written only emphasizes
Great idea. I'm going to start that today. I love it.
that.
So you believe strongly in the power of story. Tell us a bit about legacy letters, which is one of the things that you're also so passionate about, and how legacy letters coincide with the stories that we have and our duty to share them.
Yes. Okay. Well, first let's talk about a little bit more about storytelling, because people think storytelling. I'm not a storyteller, and that's not true. We all talk in story. When you're talking to your friends, you're not just doing the facts, ma'am. You're actually showing them how you felt or showing them what you saw. And that's what I mean by storytelling. You're showing as opposed to telling. And in legacy letters, that's really important. I'll give you an example. If you're writing to a kid, I write to my kids. My kids are 19, 23, and 25, but I've been writing to them for about 5 or 6 years when I first discovered this. And when I write to them, if I wanted to say, have a great trip, make sure you're careful, be brave, have fun, that'd be a boring letter, right? So what I do instead in legacy letters, and I'll tell you more about those in a second, is I find stories either about them or about myself or their dad, or even maybe a story about a friend, but mostly it's about them or me, that show what I want them to know. So I just wrote a legacy letter to my youngest son. He just started college. And he's a very extroverted, fun guy, but he also has a tendency to hide out in his room. And I just know that if he hides out in his room, he's not going to, in the beginning, he's not going to find the friends, find his tribe at school, and he's going to miss out. But if I were to say that to him, he'd throw that letter right in the garbage can. But if I told him stories about the trip he took a gap year before he went to college, and he traveled around by himself, which is very brave.
Yeah.
And I reflected back that story to him, and I didn't have to say, don't hang out in your room. He knew exactly what I was saying to him. So I was using stories so that he would listen.
I love that.
So legacy letters, I think a lot of people hear the word legacy and they think end of life.
Yeah.
And you know what? Legacy letters are beautiful to have final wishes, make sure that you have a letter just in case something happens to you. But legacy letters are for every day. And they're like gratitude letters on steroids in a way. So what a legacy letter does is you have to figure out, why are you writing the letter? So I was writing that letter to my son because I wanted to encourage him to be brave and to take risks and to know that we had his back. And those were the 3 main points. And so I told him that was why I was writing to him, was, because you're starting college. And then I had those 3 values that I really wanted to focus in on, that sort of intangible wealth. Legacy letters are about intangible wealth, your values, your wisdom, your tradition, your stories, and your love.
Yeah.
And I used stories to show him. So it's, why are you writing? What are the stories? What are you sharing? And then you reflect. There's a reflection piece on it. So instead of just telling him the story, you can say, and I see this in you, and I have faith in you. And then you share, in olden days, you would share a blessing. And I've expanded that to be, you share love and hopes and dreams. And so I expressed what I hoped for him. I hoped that he had a fabulous year and found lots of wonderful people to be with and classes to take, and that it was an exploration. And that he had a fabulous time. So that's a legacy letter that's for pretty much every day. You know, okay, my kid doesn't go to college every day, but it's not, I'm not waiting until it's to, you know, the end of life to share all of these important stories and values with him.
Well, and I think that going back to the end of life discussion, a lot of times that's when because we think that that's when we should share all of our stories, we're missing out on connection points all along the way, and opportunities to learn and grow from each other as well. And I'm thinking through what it must have felt like for your son to receive that letter. He probably will keep and cherish that forever. You know, in terms of your hopes and dreams for him and the story, it's such a beautiful thing.
In fact, that reminds me of a story of my older son. He graduated from college, and we put together what I call a legacy book. So we got legacy letters from my husband and myself and his siblings, his cousins, his aunts and uncles, and he was really lucky. He had 4 grandparents. He was so fortunate because he got letters from all 3 generations.
Wow.
And I found pictures. It would be, you know, here's you and Pa. That's what he calls my father. So a picture of my father holding him as a tiny baby, all the way up to the picture of him shaking his hand at graduation. And then the letters were interspersed. And I gave it to my son, you know, and I thought, okay, you know, it'll end up at the bottom of the closet. And he moved 3,000 miles away, stayed on the East Coast. I live in California. And he started off his life in a job, and he thought it was going to be a great job, and it wasn't. In fact, it was kind of a disaster, and he realized he couldn't work in the work environment that he was in, and he parted ways with his employer, and he was really sad. He thought he had thought it out. He thought he knew what he wanted, and he was scared because he didn't have a job and he had rent to pay, and although he knows that we would have helped him, he's fiercely independent. That would have been hard for him to accept help. And, you know, a couple of weeks later, he had ideas. And, you know, a couple of weeks after that, he actually got a job. But when he came home at Thanksgiving, he told me that in his sadness, and I won't call it despair because he's not the kind of kid who goes to despair, but he was sad and a little bit nervous that he pulled the book out. And he read those letters.
I love that.
And almost all of us talked about how independent and capable and just marvelous he was in stories. And he said it just gave him the boost that he needed. So to me, that proved to me how important this work is and how much it really does help the person who's reading it. And it made me feel fantastic that I was able to support him without even being there. And isn't that our, you know, as a parent, you sort of want to know that they feel your support, even when you're not around.
That is so incredible. And that's super powerful as well, for that to be something that is not just a treasured moment, but something that does become the pivot, you know, what you go back to over and over. That's really cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about the risks of not sharing our stories and of not communicating legacy to each other and our hopes and dreams for our family members or our loved ones' future.
So I'm going to start first with what happens in our lifetime and then end of life. So in our lifetime, there's a lot of really good evidence that kids who have what I'll call intergenerational self, they understand their family stories, they have a strong family narrative, that those kids are more resilient, have more grit, have better ability to bounce back from bad things happening in their life. Because, you know, when you tell these stories to your kids, you don't just tell the story, you know, I went to high school, I went to college, I got this great job, I married your mom, I have this great house. That's not how life works. And understanding that life is about ups and downs, that, you know, we may have had it all and then we lost it, but that was okay because we had each other, and then we worked our way up again, which actually is kind of my grandparents' story. They left Europe during World War II because they had to, and they came with the shirt on their back, and they managed to send their son to college and graduate school, and he managed to send 3 of us to, you know, so it's that wonderful immigrant story. And it gives me a lot of faith when something goes bad. I say, no, I've got this resilience in me. I can do this. So there's a lot of wonderful research out of Emory University that you can find online. And Dr. Duke has the 20 question test. And so it's an interesting article that he's written. I think he actually wrote an article, but there's also an article by an author, Bruce Feiler, who wrote about what Dr. Duke is doing. And I can send you those links for your audience. But really, it's do you know where your parents were born? What do you know where your grandparents were born? How did your parents meet? Or just simple little things like that, just stories about. So if you want to support the next generation, sharing stories is a very powerful way. But legacy letters also are really important to make sure that you don't forget to say what's important. So we are all going to die, right? And what we don't want to have happen is have a loved one die and feel like we have not said what needed to be said, or that they haven't said to us what we were hoping for, because that's painful. That makes the death so hard. But if you practice legacy letters and gratitude letters and thank you letters throughout your life with the people who matter to you, if they were to die tomorrow, you would know, I really have told them the important things. I have shown them through stories how much they mean to me. And I think that's really important. And then also at end of life, it's very hard if somebody can't speak for themselves and they haven't told you what they truly value. And one wonderful way of doing that is to attach a legacy letter to your advanced healthcare directive. I have one that spells out, in detail what I hope, how I want that if my 3 children have to make decisions on my behalf and they're struggling with it, who are allies who might be able to help them. How I know and trust that they will make the right decision, but that the most important thing is that the 3 of them love each other at the end of the process. So it's really important to make sure that people know what you want and to think about them if you can't talk for yourself.
That's interesting. I know we had talked about this before, but I just finished my end of life planning, which feels a little bizarre on one hand, but on the other hand, our family is very open about it for lots of different reasons. And I know that there are reasons behind why it's easier for us to talk about it. But one thing I found interesting was then when writing out my wishes for even my memorial service, it really gave me a lot of time for reflection as well. And it prompted me to want to reach out to the people that I hope will be involved in my memorial service and why. And one thing I hadn't thought about is what you just said about you want it to be as easy of a process for them so that the grief and the memories and the celebration piece of it can be what takes, the priority, I guess, instead of figuring out details.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's really
absolutely. Cool. Absolutely.
So what do you think are the most important aspects of that part of our lives? Death is inevitable. And how do we start to process through the control that we have as we experience death or even start talking about it with our families?
I was just reading an article that talked about habits of highly grateful people. And it says they contemplate death. And I thought, yep, that's absolutely right. Because, in fact, I teach a class at my local college called Guided Autobiography, which is writing your life 2 pages at a time. And it's 10 themes. And the last 3 themes are spirituality, death and dying, goals and aspirations. And so in spirituality, we're trying to figure out, what do we value?
Yeah.
In death and dying, I ask people to then write their own eulogy and answer the question, what would I miss if I were gone? Because contemplating that, then you have to, when you go to goals and aspirations, you have to think about, okay, so if those are my values and these are the things that I'd miss and this is how I want to be remembered, am I living true to that? How does that make my goals look different than what I'm doing right now? Or, hey, my goals are in alignment with my values and my way I want to be remembered. Let me keep this up because it's really important.
Yeah.
So I think that's the number one thing, is to try to pause regularly. I do it every January. I try to pause and do that exercise. What do I truly value? How are my values in alignment with how I want to be remembered and how I want to live my life? And then my goals for the next year. How do I make sure that I stay on that path? So I think that that's a really important one. There's some wonderful games that you can play. I know that sounds funny, death games. There's a card game called Go Wish, which I think is fantastic. And it's cards, and it talks about things that matter to you at the end of life. And you and your partner, who's your agent, both do it. So first you sort how you would want it, and then they have to ask you why. Like, they have to pretend they're a 5-year-old, right? Why do you want that? You know, and you have until they get to the point of what is the underlying value. And it's a way of really getting to know the person who is going to make decisions for you. And it's a great way to get your kids to understand what's truly important to them. And I suggest people start this discussion with their kids when their kids turn 18, because when they turn 18, you can't make decisions for them anymore. They're making decisions. And so it's good for them to think it through. It's good for them to get an advance directive. It's good if you're their agent to really understand what's important to them. And you can do it gently. You don't have to go the whole 9 yards at the beginning. But it normalizes the conversation because everyone's healthy.
Yeah.
That's what I wish for people, is that they start a conversation about death when everyone is healthy. But if that can't happen, it's still really important to try to figure out what are the person's values. What really matters the most to them? How do they want to end their life? How do they want to be remembered? And ask those questions and try to get them to write it down if they can still. And then encourage them to write a legacy letter so that they can die knowing that they said everything that they needed to say. And I actually came into legacy letters through that route. I was a health advocate, and I was listening to a podcast, and somebody mentioned these ethical wills, and I looked it up, and I found a book, and it was written by a doctor who was medical director of a hospice. And he talked about how offering legacy letters to people who were in hospice really, in a lot, not in every case, obviously, but in many cases, gave the person a lot of comfort. Yeah. And that's where I started with it. And so I think the legacy letters are really important at end of life, but hopefully you're not waiting until end of life to write.
Well, and that makes me think too, and something you were saying earlier around supporting the next generation, it almost feels like this opens up the door for important conversations. You could even start through your storytelling. We would be able to understand each other a little bit better around why we think the way we do, which is super important today. Around beliefs and backgrounds and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
those are hard conversations.
Go ahead.
They're hard conversations if you never have them.
Yeah.
They're easy conversations if you make a habit of having them.
Yeah. Well, and I'm even thinking through, some of the questions that you were talking about in the 20 questions, little things around my story and the story of my husband and I. We haven't talked about them with our children because it doesn't seem important. But I bet if I ask them right now, they don't know how we met. So that's some really exciting, easy, simple things to start with.
Yes.
So how would one go about sitting down in front of either a blank screen or a blank piece of paper? I know you talked a little bit at the beginning about the 3 things that you want to include. Are there different kinds of legacy letters, or do they all kind of come from the same nucleus of content?
I don't think they come from the same nucleus of content because they're used for different purposes, but I think they all have the story, the reflection, and the love. To me, those are the most important things. You don't want to be writing in a prescriptive manner, like do this, do that. You want to try to show, you can say, I hope. If you want to write in a prescriptive manner, that's what your lawyer is for. Right? You can have your will,
Yes.
And then you can explain why you did what you did in your will. That's a perfect use of a legacy letter. That's a very traditional one, explaining the distribution of assets. And legacy letters can be as short as, 4 little paragraphs, or they can be 20 pages long. If you're writing one legacy letter at the end of life, you may have to say a lot of stuff that you haven't said before. But if you're doing it on a regular, if I'm writing a birthday legacy letter, let's say to my kids, it's going to be a page and a half. If I'm writing, right. And because I'm trying to make it, it's sort of like when I teach writing classes, I talk about try to tell one small story at a time. So with legacy letters, if you can tell one small story at a time, or a few stories, for a certain purpose at a time, the legacy letter is readable and impactful.
Okay.
If you write 20 pages, it's really hard to digest.
Which that makes it simpler even for the writer then,
Yes.
As well.
Yes. Good. Would you like me to read you an example?
I would love that. I would love
Okay,
that.
so I actually have one that was written by that son who didn't get the job didn't work out, and he's gotten more legacy letters because we started with him a little earlier, or I did, but I think this letter shows the impact on the kid. I mean, he wrote this, he was 24, so 4 years after he got his first legacy letter.
Okay.
I need to put my glasses on. I'm sorry. And it was written to my husband on my husband's big birthday. Dear Dad, happy birthday. I hope that you have a wonderful day filled with adventures and exercise and plenty of shenanigans. You have always been my greatest hero and singular role model, and I'm amazed every day at your accomplishments and thankful each and every day that I was given the opportunity to be your son. Through my 25 years of getting to share this experiment we call life with you, I have to come to appreciate the fact that no matter how much I may fight with you over exercise, homework, family vacations, or life decisions, you have always been the person I most trusted to have my best interest at heart, and I know that you will always support me. From my earliest memories as a little boy in Mill Valley, I've always looked up to you as the source of what it means to be a man and a father. I remember back when you worked so late that you would come home past my bedtime, but I would wait up at night to listen to you tell me the 3 most important things, your way of sharing love. I remember how much you helped shape my passion for history when you homeschooled us, making my studies fun and exciting. I remember being so proud when you first decided to coach my soccer teams and trying extra hard in every game. I remember my excitement when I got into college and the pure joy I heard in your voice when I told you I'd been accepted. I remember the pride I felt when I looked out from the stage on graduation day and saw you in the audience getting to see me graduate and move on to the real world. From my first steps in life to every step I take in the real world, you've always been there, cheering me on and picking me up when I need sound advice and a guiding voice. You taught me what it means to be a man who will only accept the very best from himself, but understands when others need help to reach their potential. You are a truly loyal friend to those who matter to you. Your ability to be informed and be able to understand both sides of an issue is something that I strive to imitate every day. All in all, Dad, I can't think of a single person I admire and respect more than you. I wish you the happiest of birthdays and the best possible day. Love, your son.
That's amazing. I think that's amazing for so many reasons. You've instilled that impact in him by starting the legacy letters, so that he was then able to, I don't know many 24-year-old male children who would write that, or who would have the awareness to put that onto paper. That's just beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, he's a very good writer. So, and not every legacy letter has to be that complicated. And there were a lot of stories in there that he didn't have to expand because he and my husband know each other so well.
Right.
I was really blown away by how much he's absorbed. And, if you haven't started this, like when your kids are 2, it doesn't matter. I started, so he was 25, I just realized, instead of 24, but his first letter was when he was 20. And I've used and sure, I wish I had known all about legacy letters when he was born, so that every year on his birthday, I could have written him one. And every time he went to school, the first day of school, I could have written him one. and marked all of those things and then handed him a book at 18 with 18 years worth of letters. That would be super cool.
Yeah.
And for your audience members who are, in that state, go for it.
Yeah.
But you can bring up memories of things that happened when he was growing up. In a letter that I wrote to him recently, I talked about how he played with griot trains. So, and it was great for me because I could just smile and remember him. So it's a way of remembering yourself what happened.
Yeah, and I think too, we don't often remember our own childhoods. Only through storytelling from our parents or our grandparents do we start to piece together what our childhood looked like. So, if you've not started it until your kids are grown, that's still okay.
Absolutely. And you know what, if you don't have kids, it's also
that's true.
Okay, because I have many clients and friends who write to their friends. I write to my best friend all the time. Mostly thank you notes for all the lovely things she does for me. But I have friends who are unmarried, and yet there are people in our lives who we need to acknowledge. That special teacher that supported you, your mentors right now, your nieces and nephews, your friends. So we recently had a fire here in Northern California, very sad. And I was compelled to write letters to the firefighters. I don't know them, but I wanted them to know how I felt about them.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be something that's all family based. I want people to know that this is for everyone.
And that's what a beautiful way to connect with people in your community as well. And that's community is a big part of what I believe strongly in, and a lot of our audience members will as well. And that's a really super practical way to connect with your community, by reaching out to those that are in it and doing the work to make sure that you're getting what you need every day. Yeah. What's your personal mantra?
To live my life with love and kindness, helping one person at a time.
I love that. And where do you go, or who do you look to when you need a reset? You spend the majority of your days teaching others, encouraging others, and supporting others. What do you do, or where do you go when you need that for your own self?
Well, I have to say one of the things I do is I get in nature. Nature is my church. When I go out and I look at the redwood trees, or I walk on a beach, I feel life is good. In fact, that's why I named my company Wellfleet Circle, because I go to this little tiny town in Wellfleet. It's got these incredible beaches. I've been going there since I was born. And we have a little cottage right next to my parents' little cottage. And when I go out on the beach there, I feel calm. I feel happy, that life has meaning and purpose. And that's what I want people to feel when they write these letters. So nature's a big thing for me. But then, of course, they're the friends and my husband. We've known each other for 38 years.
Wow.
We've been married for 31. And my kids have heard the story of how we met about 1,000 times. They're like, yeah, we know. But and my puppy dog. If I really need love, I go to my puppy dog.
They're so great for that.
Yes, and it's really important to maintain friendships. It's harder as your kids stop school, and I work for myself out of my home office unless I'm teaching or doing a workshop, and it's so easy to just close yourself in. And so I work at making sure that I have strong connections with people who matter to me and who care about me. And so if something goes wrong, those are the people I go to.
Yeah, that's important and special.
Yeah.
We have a couple of minutes left. What else would you like to share with us?
I would like to share with people that this is not hard to do. It sounds like it's hard to do, right? And I read you a letter that, of course, I think my son must have worked on a lot. But, this was his dad's big birthday.
Yeah.
And so it mattered tremendously to him. And but it doesn't have to be that hard. And so I want to support people in doing this. And I have a lot of really good resources on my website. If you go onto the website, there's a legacy letter and a power of story tab, and they're examples, they're free handouts. So I want people to feel supported. I also think that thinking about storytelling. So just, read stories. Notice what stories pull you in. What is it about story that engages you? And then if you're frightened of telling stories, I want to remind you of one thing that I saw when on a Brené Brown TED Talk, which is that it takes vulnerability. It's true, it takes vulnerability. But by opening yourself up, you open yourself up to such tremendous possibility. And it might take courage, but as she says, courage has the same word base as core, which is heart. It takes heart.
Yeah.
And so sharing your story with your whole heart has huge benefits. It sends out little tendrils. It's like a little, I always say I want to be I want to be like that pebble in the water. Just put the pebble in and it sends ripples out. So maybe my son who wrote that letter is going to write a letter to his son or to a friend who's struggling. That's the ripple that I want to create.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we connected. I'm glad that we both have Wellfleet in common, different. I cannot wait to continue this the whole conversation around this, and I'm hopeful that after our audience has an opportunity to watch this, that we can engage in some good dialogue around it, and hopefully share the impact that everyone's taking with their own legacy letters. And like you said at the beginning, you just have to start with one.
Yeah, just one. And I would love to hear how people feel about it when they try it. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
And
conversation.
My email in there. I want it. If somebody wants to send me a legacy letter, I love reading them. I love reading them.
Melanie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This has just been a wonderful, wonderful time.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.